Morning! Actually, it's not morning, it's evening. So, it's been a glorious day where I live in the UK. Just put my cup of tea down. And I've been out on the mountain bike and obviously been watching the Grand Prix today, so music's taken a bit of a back seat. So, rather than doing this in the morning, I'm doing this again in the evening. So, it's John, and welcome to the Sunday not quite morning rant. In the evening. So just one thing on the Grand Prix. Close your ears if you don't want to know who won it, but Lewis didn't, but I was impressed with how he recovered from the shunt that he had on the first corner. Him and Bottas had a bit of a coming together. So, you know, he did that, but I was really impressed with sort of Haas. I mean, Haas in their first season getting points, well, hey. So it was a bit of a mixed grid actually. Anyway, Grand Prix aside, I got asked a question on the channel, I think it was Thursday, and I thought I'd save it up until I actually sat down and did this on Sunday. So the question was about this, which everyone should recognise as a Roland MX-1, especially as it says it at the top of the screen there. And the question went along the lines of, if you don't have RER equipment, then 4 of the faders on this unit are as much use as a chocolate teapot. And I have to be honest and say, probably on the face of it, I'd agree with you, because they are about as much use as a chocolate teapot if you don't have USB inputs plugged into them, because you can't reroute them to do other things. So let's just recap on what the mixer itself, what inputs it actually has. So if I hold that like so to the camera, and there you go, you can see all the inputs there. So we start off with some phone in, that's the phone jet phones, left, right, stereo outs, 4 mono inputs, a stereo input which is not a 1/4 inch, but it's a 3/8 of an inch jack, the sort of thing you get off your iPod. Then we have these 4 phono sockets for send and returns, and for the life of me I have no idea why they put phono sockets on onto this unit, but hey ho, they have. Then this is a bit of an anomaly, I'm not sure about this one either. It's a digital send or a digital return or a digital input. You do actually have to configure the unit so it knows what to do with this thing. Otherwise it will, I think our default configuration is it's an output, not an input. But I still struggle with why it's there at all. I have to be honest. It's sort of a bit of a mismatch, this unit, if I'm honest. Then we have an in and a through MIDI channel, USB-B input, and for USB-A inputs, power and power switch. So if I flip that round so that I'm looking at it, start from this side. 1, 2, 3, 4 are those mono inputs. That's channel 5 and 6, which is the stereo input. That is the digital input to the unit. 1, 2, 3, 4 are the USB inputs, and that is the PC input. So when you have a PC plugged into the USB-B socket, that is the one that allows you to actually have the output from the PC coming through the same mixer. Okay, so that's how the unit works. The unit is configured. So, going back to the question that was asked, if I don't have anything plugged in on the USB-A sockets, which is those 4 sockets there, I can't use those sockets for anything else, and that's correct, you can't, because they are absolutely tied to the USB sockets, and those USB sockets have to have something coming into them. You can't reroute them. This is not like a standard Allen Heath or names escape me, but it's not like a standard mixing desk. Okay, it really is specified for probably more live performances than studio work, and for the ARIA gear. However, it's not always as cut and dried as what I was just saying. So I have my Jupiter 80 plugged into my MX-1. Okay, so my Jupiter 80 occupies one of these channels. So in terms of what I have in my setup here, I have a System 1, I have a TB3, I have a TR8. Okay, so 3 ARIA modules that occupy 3 of those 4 USB-A sockets. And then the 5th of the USB-A socket, sorry, the 4th of the USB-A sockets is my Jupiter. Okay, my Jupiter comes in here, it's presented on one of these faders, so I can actually control it into the master mix that's coming off this unit. I can also run all of the effects on the unit on that channel, so I can add in additional delays, I can add in all kinds of other effects, flanges, etc. that are on this unit into my Jupiter as post-mix stuff. I could also send the signal out to another unit for additional processing if I wanted to, so I can send it out through the effects send and return, and that's all in stereo. Jupiter comes in stereo. It also allows me to present the Jupiter to my Mac in as 2 of the channels off this mixer, so it gets a stereo, so there's no analog in there at all. It all goes straight through in stereo into the computer, and straight in digital as well. So it works quite well from that perspective. On the flip side, I can talk from my Mac to my Jupiter, because it also recognises that the Jupiter is there, so I can actually read and write from the Jupiter through the Mac through this. Okay. The other thing is, having had a long chat with the chappies in the local toy shop, and toy shop for me is a local music shop, a number of the other Roland pieces of equipment have had firmware updates that allow them to work with the MX-1. So it seems to be a 2-stage process. When Roland released the unit itself, they will release the unit either directly as they release it or shortly after they release it. They'll release a firmware patch that gives it MX-1 functionality, and then in the next MX-1 patch you'll find the functionality will also be added into the MX-1. So the MX-1 will work with those units. So I know for a fact that all of the boutique range of equipment will work with the MX-1. I know that because I've had one. I don't own one, but I've actually had one here. I've had it on borrow from a friend, and I was quite impressed with the actual unit itself. I can't justify personally spending the money on one of those units at the moment, because I think my Kronos and my Jupiter give me pretty much everything that those units will give me at the moment. But they are quite impressive. And the other thing about those units is that they don't have an independent power supply on them. It's sort of batteries, or it's a USB powered piece of equipment. And one of the USB-A sockets, if I do that one there, is powered, so that puts 5 volts out on it, which is enough to power one of those boutique synthesizers. So that's all well and good. That all works pretty well. So on the face of it, in terms to answer your question, the answer is yes, it is about as useful as a chocolate teapot. However, if you seem to look at the strategy that seems to be coming downstream, is newer keyboards can present themselves up to the ARIA or to the MX-1, should I say, so you can actually use the MX-1 in a live or studio environment where you might not have enough places on your master mixer. So that's that, sort of. The only thing I will say now, having thought about this, is, and this is sort of a message probably to Roland, is if the strategy is to to use the MX-1 as a conduit for mixing sound out, either through a PC or to a PC, or out to a live PA system somewhere. And it is a good size unit. I mean, it's just about the right size to sort of, I mean, as you can see, when mine slots in, it slots in here on my rig, which is just about the right size when I'm playing here to be able to sort of go up. And by the way, that's the wrong thing to do because the Kronos doesn't work with it, but you know, I can change the volume and stuff on other pieces of equipment that's sort of round me. My Jupiter is behind me. So if I was out on the road, then you know, maybe that's an ideal size for a piece of equipment, and it does come with one of those lock points as well, so you can actually lock it down to you know, the equipment when you set up live on stage, because obviously it is of that size where you could just under the arm and away it goes. So going back to what I was saying, if this is the strategy, then I think this is a great unit. However, what I do think is where it's missing is twofold. The first is, if you're going to bring more equipment on stream that's USB enabled, I know again that this can only handle 4 direct inputs from pieces of equipment. So you can't daisy chain a piece of equipment using a separate USB hub, for argument's sake. So I can't have the TP3 and the TR8 onto a USB hub and then into one of these sockets, and similarly with other pieces of equipment I can't do the same. So, you know, thinking about the boutique range of equipment, if you manage to buy 1 or 2 or 3 of those synthesizers in the boutique range, you know, you can only really use one of them at a time in here, or it's direct one plugged in into each one of these. So I think this is a great first attempt, but I think you really need to do a bit more thinking about it. So you can give us more functionality around those USB pieces of equipment, and possibly I think maybe the next idea might be to have maybe, you know, 8 or 16 channels of switchable between the audio and the USB side of it, so that you can actually turn around and say, actually what I want is, or maybe what you've done here, which is 4 mono, and then, you know, from there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 stereo inputs onto the mixer, which can be assignable between either a USB input or an audio input. That would make it far more flexible for the musician who's on the road who's using this, because he can then choose how he's going to input it. And on the flip side of that would be then to have maybe 6 or 8 USB inputs to the device, so that you could actually sort of double up one way or the other. So, you know, anyway, Roland, that's just my thoughts on this, but you know, it seems to be where your product strategy seems to be going. That seems to be makes a lot of sense to me. But then what do I know? I'm just a lowly musician. So there you go, rant on the MX-1. The next thing I just thought I'd cover off is I'm recording this on the 3rd of April. Okay, in the UK. So apologies for those of you who are not in the UK, but in the UK, our tax year runs to the 5th of April, from the 6th of April to the 5th of April every year, or I think next year, if you get what I mean. I was in a previous life an accountant. Yes, I know. I sort of learnt my mistakes, and because I'm an accountant, I know very much about doing taxes. Sorry, dry mouth. And so this is just sort of you know, for anybody who watches this video and is sitting thinking about it. You know, don't think about it. Do your books early. Make sure you've got all your invoices in. Make sure you've got your bank statements. Make sure you have got all your receipts. Get them all written down. I know it's laborious. I know it's boring. But believe me, you know, if you take some time to think about these things, then you actually probably will save yourself some money. So, you know, remember, and this is sort of just general advice, I'm not giving you specific advice, this is just general advice. So remember, the definition of profit is, you know, the cost of getting goods and services to their eventual state. So that's the definition of profit. Okay, so any expense that you incur to deliver a service, so if you're a musician for argument's sake and you're travelling to gigs all the time, you know, the cost of that travel has to be factored into the profit that you make. Okay, similarly, you know, the costs of cabling and power supplies and, you know, numerous other bits and bobs, electricity to run your studio, are also part of the expenses of you earning a living. So remember to be sort of vigilant on that sort of stuff. The only thing I would say is don't do it as a percentage of your house, because that never works. If you have a studio in your house, you know, always do it as some sort of sensible calculation that sits behind, you know, £1 or £2 a week to run your studio. So the other piece of advice around this area is never leave it to the last minute. And I know plenty of my friends that do, and they spend probably the latter half of January running around like headless chickens, because the 31st of January is when you have to submit your tax return for the year we're just coming out of, so next January. They probably spend the latter half of January running out like headless chickens, trying to find all the invoices and trying to work out what they did in the prior year. So, you know, as it's coming up to the end of the year end, do yourself a favour, I suppose is what I'm trying to say. Sit down, spend a couple of hours over the next few weeks, putting all your income and expenditure together. If you use an accountant, believe me, they will be absolutely ecstatic if you walk into their offices at the beginning of May, able to present them with all your books and records so that they can do your accounts and your tax return for you. Because believe me, they hate it when people turn up in January and say they need to do tax returns. And also, you also run the risk of, if they can't turn your tax return around in time, you run the risk of I think it's a £100 fine now. So automatic £100 fine before you even start. So I don't know about you, but I can't afford to give the taxman more money than I really need to give him. Hey-ho. So anyway, that's the rant for today. See you on the next one.